it's an interesting question because there's a multitude of factors that approach blockages of any kind of infrastructure development. Africa has its own certain challenges, and some of them are new and some of them have been there for a long time. I would say there's probably a few aspects that you could look at for renewables specifically. The first is the old adage of bankability, and everyone is happy to say that we have the resource, we have the people, we have the technology, we know how to do it, but we still have to procure the funds at the end of the day. So where does the money come from is always going to be the last word and testament in the deployment of any project. And that's going to come down to deploying adequate risk provisors into looking at any kind of a project. I think the EU is well placed to assist Africa in a lot of these kind of questions. They certainly have in the past. We're having a number of those conversations here at the conference today about where we can see similarities with what has been done in the EU in the past, what has been applied in Africa, and where there are parallels for cooperation. So bankability, I think, certainly is the first. A second aspect that is an African unique thing is maybe not so unique. We saw a similar thing happening in Texas last year with the grid coming down, and that is something that's really applies in Africa, is grid. The strength of the grid and the grid diversity. Transmission networks in Africa are not nearly as developed as the rest of the world, as we are aware. It's an interesting problem because we have in some places some of the best renewable resources in the world. You can look at the Horn of Africa, look at Somalia, where you have wind speeds that are incredible, and any European country would be very blessed to have it. But you can't evacuate the power. There's no grid there. There's no transmission lines. There's no network. So you can build a wonderful wind project, you just can't do anything with it. So grid is certainly a big part of that. And I think maybe a third aspect is something that we all struggle with in different parts of our life, and that's lack of awareness of what's happening and what the growing trends are, the existing status quo. So politicians in Africa that are setting strategic targets, guidelines, CEOs of the grid networks, they've done something in the past that's been working great for the last 60, 50 years. Why should they change that to this new buzzword that everyone is well, maybe not so new anymore, but this new aspect of renewables that everybody is talking about? We have had coal, in some places we had gas. Why should they change to something else just because they're seeing it in social media or they're getting pressure from the developed world? This is a question I think that we need to address through obviously exposure and training in some aspects. But it will come with time, that kind of awareness, and it's just something to work on as we go. Africa is truly blessed, I think, with skills and capability. So we see the modern age of development or so, but lest we forget that technology started in Egypt, and we've been leading the way in terms of ancient culture, and there's no reason why that Africa can't catch up with modern developments. I think that university certainly is a starting point. We see in South Africa a number of universities that have added postgraduate courses that are specifically targeted at renewables. You want to always grow off a solid engineering base specifically for technological sides of renewable awareness and development. And so undergraduate degrees is a good place to start, traditional engineering or business qualifications. But then we've seen a lot of universities add specific postgrad renewable focused courses at honours and masters and PhD level. So University of Stellenbosch, University of Cape Town, these are some of the universities that have put in place renewable specific departments that only look at the development of renewables and the growth of the renewable skills base within the country. And we're starting to see a lot of that similar being replicated throughout the rest of the African continent in African universities. That is well sped up by the relationship with European and US and some Chinese universities as well, where you can have a skills exchange programs that have been put in place. We've seen a lot of that been happening over the last number of years of EU-Africa partnerships in terms of skills development. And that has led to some really good strategic developments that have happened from organizations such as the GIZ that have put in place embedded staff members into government departments to try and upskill and transfer skills across. So we've seen the value in those, not just in formalized government departments, but in smaller municipal sectors as well, where you would have someone being placed in for a 6-month or a 12-month program, and they then affect all of the people around them, and then it grows from there. So I think those have been enormously valuable and are very welcome for skills dissemination in the African market. Baseload power is a wonderful term, and it's something that gets bandied around at every renewable conference everywhere across the world. I think the actual term and the designation of the term is changing as we go. It's not a definitive term. As the energy landscape shifts and changes, what we view as being baseload changes as well. The normal proportion that is bandied around is a 75%, 25% aspirational target. 75% renewable energy, 25% baseload. That would come from traditional sources such as coal, gas, or nuclear. This is not always achievable for much of Europe and the US. So a lot of Africa can really struggle in achieving this as well. South Africa is certainly well placed for knowing the challenges of trying to get the mix right, and there's a lot of other complications that come into South African load shedding, etc. But the rest of the African continent deals with a lot of other challenges as well that maybe the rest of the world doesn't have in place. So you can't rush out ahead and just overnight convert your grid across to a 75% reliance upon a fluctuating generation source. So that is where the main problem comes in. If your grid is relatively underdeveloped and sensitive to fluctuations, and you expose it to a too high a degree of renewables too early on, before you've done deep grid reinforcement, you're going to offset your grid and you're going to put it into a state of imbalance. And so aspects such as your spinning reserve and grid frequency fluctuations becomes an important aspect to consider. And that's where storage, the rollout of battery storage at a utility scale can really assist on that. To be able to do that, though, you need to have economies of scale. So if your grid is very, very small, then battery storage at a utility scale is going to be very expensive to do. So as Africa slowly increases the interconnections between countries, transmission line growth and the expansion of those interconnections, it gives them a greater proportion of a greater chance for being able to roll out large-scale battery storage mechanisms for stabilizing the grid. So that is certainly something that we're going to see with time. It's starting to happen now with the linking up of countries into the power pools. And with time, those power pools will grow their interconnections as well. So that's something that's going to be very exciting going forward. Africa is also obviously still blessed with a large amount of natural gas, which we see as a bridging fuel possibly. So that's something that we have at the moment. We would possibly be foolish not to utilize that, but then still have the correct kind of targets in place for it not to be the end game with gas, but as a bridging fuel towards ultimate move over towards renewables as well. So I think that's probably where we see the current balance of how we're going to get towards that 75-25% split. We're not there yet, but hopefully with time we're going to hit that target.